Roadrunner. Anyway, it very patriotic because it has red, white, and blue markings around its eyes, which is kind of neat.
That's cool. I've
Yeah,
never seen those, so
yeah.
yeah, very cool. All right, so we are live on YouTube now.
Okay.
So we got Bruce Rawles, Lynn Johnson, and we're reading Absence from Felicity. And let me get the book up.
It's the story of Helen Schuckman and her scribing of A Course in Miracles by Kenneth Wapnick, PhD. And we're on page 150. No, is that right? No, that's not right. 218.
Okay, well, on my Kindle, this is good. We're on page 214 on the Kindle, and we might not even be in the same place. So we're kind of close. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
Usually the Kindle page and the paper treeware page is not always too close.
yeah.
I have us where we are looking at the miracle principles
Hmm, hmm.
and you can see on the screen where I have
Yep,
us.
yep, yep.
All right, well, good. What do you want to read?
Sure, sure.
All right, then do
So
you
yeah, at
have
the
to
bottom
leave
of
early
page
today?
218. So again?
Do you have to leave early today?
No,
Okay, all
no.
right.
So anyway, I'll just back up a paragraph as I often do for context. So Ken's commentary at the bottom of page 218 begins with, although Helen and Bill supplied the dates of each day's scribing activities, they did not begin this until slightly later in the process. And so we can only approximate the dates of these early notes. We continue with what later became the fourth miracle principle. Originally, the statement was unnumbered. And here it's notes, quoting from Helen's notes here, which became miracle principle number 4. All miracles mean life, and God is the giver of life. He will direct you very specifically. Plan ahead is good advice in the world where you should and must control and direct where you have accepted responsibility. But the universal plan is in more appropriate hands. You will know all you need to know. Make no attempts to plan ahead in this respect. Helen's notebook at this point contains some notes relating to work and then continues with the next miracle principle. And then this is miracles are habits and should be involuntary. Otherwise, they may become undemocratic. Selective miracles are dangerous and may destroy the talent. You can see where the wording has been changed a little here and there, made more general and universal, it would seem. This principle was subsequently corrected by Jesus in Helen's handwriting in the original typed manuscript, nicknamed by us the urtext, meaning the original text. The second sentence was removed and replaced by, they should not be under conscious control, and the third sentence was amended to read, consciously selected miracles are usually misguided, and this will make the talent useless. Still later, this last sentence was changed to its current form, Okay. The next 5 principles, 6 through 10, were virtually dictated straight through as they are found in the published course. The current 9th principle originally came as 2 separate ones, however. Helen then wrote, Helen, I don't think Bill wants this course, and I'm not sure I do either. He is very snappy. Now that's a line that I know Ken has quoted many times in his lectures, about the reluctance that Helen and Bill both had to the material, which again, as we've been saying right along since we started reading this book, or rereading as in this case, we're seeing how much this biography of Helen's really is just a beautiful representation of how we, on a deep level, all know this material because it originates from this source that we all share and that we all have never left in truth. But because we're still invested in the world significantly, and that's what the course addresses, is helping us look at that and seeing that it's made us miserable, the ego's thought system more particularly. Um, we have an enormous resistance that needs to be looked at and gently relinquished, um, of our own free will and accord, not by some form of coercion or otherwise force, but just through the grace of seeing that's in our truly best interest, right?
Well, yeah, and this whole thing that the changes, the shifts that went through this particular dictation, I think is really interesting, um, because the words that came to Helen's mind from the thoughts that were coming from Jesus's mind, um, were really different. And here I'm looking for my course book, which I have every course book except the um, FIP version just sitting here. So, but isn't that just crazy?
Well, you can always go online for that.
Well, but yeah, and I can do that. And
There's a web edition.
but you know what the actual miracle principle is,
Hmm.
that uh let's see, that ended up being the one that was used. But the idea of planning
Hmm.
that's discussed here.
Hmm.
And this thing that says plan ahead is good advice in the world, where you should and must control and direct where you have accepted responsibility. But the universal plan is more in more appropriate hands. You will know all you need to know. I would love to have read that in the course. I mean, I know he says things like this,
Hmm.
but this is a pretty direct thing saying,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know, just stop planning. You're better off letting, and there is a universal plan.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think it's reinforced in so many other ways and elsewhere in the course but yeah, that's being a good Boy Scout and being prepared on the level of form is good advice. I think one can overdo it, but I think that the point is if we really develop trust, which there's a whole section, quite an extensive section in the manual devoted to that, um, we don't really need to sweat the program and can trust that the script that we have written on some unconscious level that we're not aware of will provide us exactly what we need to undo the ego through our forgiveness classroom. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And not just that, I mean, not on a philosophical, okay, that's really wonderful, uh-huh. But I think he's talking in general about our entire life and the way that we operate in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
I like the focus on, let the one who knows do the planning and stop bothering yourself with all of the of your thoughts of how things should be.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, maybe because that's really hitting me now. Uh, as a reality is that I need do nothing really. And it's all because it's already done. But anyway, um, so uh, anyway, I was going to read what the actual um, was said instead of the talent. Um, but like I said, I can't find my book. I must have taken it in the other room. Um, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so so the next ones were virtually dictated straight through as they are found in the published course. Um, but then the ninth one was two separate ones. And I think we already talk about that, Bill didn't like the odd number of miracle
Mm.
principles and thought that
Right, right.
50 would be a good number to have. I don't know if we talked about that, but
And the course history trivia minutia department, yeah, it would seem, but yeah, for history buffs, course history buffs, that's a
well, the reason
tidbit
I
there.
say that is because all these other versions of the course I have all those other miracle principles, and they're not combined in this way.
Uh-huh.
They're, things that people took from the notes or the ur text, basically. And so, they're why I have 4 or 5 volumes of a course that were edited by people that disagreed with Ken and Helen and Jesus, I don't know, but I do. And So it's just interesting to me that the only one I can't find is the one that I think is more accurate. So I'm over here complaining about it. But anyway, where uh, Helen is talking about Bill being very snappy is the last
Hmm.
thing that you read. You want me to continue reading?
Sure.
Okay. So, Helen, I don't think Bill wants this course, and I'm not sure I do either. He is very snappy. Helen's writing this down.
Hmm.
Okay, Jesus, I think this is slightly true because something is bothering him, but he is certainly not very snappy. So why not try to help him instead of blowing it up into an obstruction? He helps you all the time. Helen, I resent this. He is supposed to help me. Note, I do not always feel this way. It's a danger signal now and just means something's wrong. Anyway, presumably this course is an elective. So what we're reading is Helen's discussion with Jesus in her mind about what she thinks is happening and how upset she is, and even with her little asides and notes.
Hmm. Hmm.
So,
And brilliantly, a lot of the material that was meant for Bill and Hal personally was extended and generalized to include everyone in a very brilliant way, I think. So, and this is one example of that.
mhm,
Yeah, what
yeah.
you're right in the middle of here.
Exactly. So anyway, presumably Helen is saying in this discussion with Jesus, this course is an elective. Jesus then responded in what was then typed in as the introduction to the text, albeit in a more simplified form. Later, this introduction was added to, as explained above. What follows is the earlier version, beginning with Jesus' answer to Helen's presumption. Right, so this is Jesus. No, it isn't. It's a definite requirement. Only the time you take it is voluntary. Free will does not mean you establish the curriculum. It only means you elect what to take when. So that's an answer to Helen saying, I think this is
Hmm.
probably an elective. And he's like, nope, it's not. It is a required
Yeah.
course, but it doesn't mean that you're going to take the same in the same order as anyone else or in an order that you think you should be taking it in.
Right.
Um, the, you still have to learn the lessons.
Hmm. Yeah, and a lot of Ken's commentaries, when this particular part of the course comes up, he will comment and explain that, you know, Helen made sort of a uh, snappy, playful um, comment, like because she was in a university environment. This course is anyway. Presumably, this course is an elective, and then his Jesus' response was, "No, the course isn't an elective. It's a required course, right? Because that was kind of his snappy, humorous, lighthearted response to Helen's humorous, lighthearted question. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So Jesus is snappy too.
yeah, yeah. So I'll meet your snappy and raise you one.
I'll raise you one. Uh, So okay, so it's just because you are not ready to do what you should that time exists at all. This is Jesus telling Helen.
Now,
The only
that's
reason,
that's a cool line.
yeah. The only reason there's time is because you want to procrastinate.
Hmm.
You are not ready to accept the truth.
Yeah, and
And
there's another distillation of the 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 real explanation of our resistance, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, exactly. And I mean, when you look at it logically and say, you know, here I could have, total joy, peace, experience nothing but harmony and in the love of God, be happy all day. It's like saying to somebody, do you want to go to heaven? Yes, but not today. not right now.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Because that's what he's telling us. If you didn't want to waste your time and really wanted to learn, really wanted to do this, then it would absolutely, you would absolutely have it. But the reason that you're not progressing the way that your mind tells you you should be is because you're the one who's procrastinating. And I can see that every day when it's time to do the daily lesson, and the I would really rather wallow in this anguish for a few minutes, or be unhappy or fearful, or try to make a plan to do something for myself, rather than to remember that God's will for me is perfect happiness. you know
Yeah, and I think again that's part of the resistance, isn't it? I mean, we 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 profess to be avid course students and love the course. And Ken says, if you really want it, if you really love the course, you admit to yourself and look at the part of yourself that really hates the course and is and digging in its heels, with everything it's got, and just see, well, yeah, and that's just one symptom of, the hell no, I won't go. I'm not going to do what the workbook says every twice a day and then up to every 5 minutes kind of thing. And it's not the rituals that are the aim, as it says. It's the idea of just being willing to look at your mind, because the ego does not want to look at the mind. That's the last place ego wants to be. That's where, if we enter that realm, if we go past that outer shield of oblivion into the mind, we see the morass and the chaos and the hideous Dorian Gray dream of ego's insane world of sin, guilt, fear, uh, repression, projection, and then finally perception. And just realize it's like, well, that's crazy making. Yeah, and that's why the Holy Spirit wants us to look at it, and it comes at the course comes at it from so many different angles, so that we can see that that's really the only thing that is limiting us and holding us back from the peace that we really want, is that schizophrenia that we're still hanging on to, each of us seeming individuals. Well, the whole idea of individuality is the basis for this, schizophrenia, or vice versa. I guess not sure which came first on that, or if they're simultaneous, but
Simultaneous, yeah.
yeah. The other thing in that last sentence that we read at the bottom of page 219 in the print version is it is just because you're not ready to do what you should that time takes it all. I emphasize the word should. It's not in italics. But in one of the study groups I was in online the other day, it came up, the word should came up. And should's actually in the course way more than I thought it would be.
A
And
lot.
it's interesting because our association with should is usually some kind of a guilt trip. You know, you should do this or you shouldn't do that. Certainly the whole puritanical thing comes to mind, but kind of on a more deep level, it's, the guilt and shame thought system is implicit in how we by default use that word. But in the course, it occurs to me that the word should only means, if you want to have um, the peace, this is what is required for you to do with your mind in order to have it. And so should is no, it's not a moralistic or a shame, blame, promoting kind of a thing, or certainly the whole idea is to undo the guilt, but it's having us look at the shame, blame, guilt thought system without condemnation, that is a requirement. So, and that's, I think, and that's that case, or that sense, that's where, all the shoulds in the course really kind of take on a new meaning, because there's no demand and in the course of anyone. It really just says, if you want A, you have to do B, and the A is the peace of God, and B is the consistent forgiveness practice, right?
It's absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you're talking about this, because I hear a lot of course students saying that I shouldn't should on myself, and should no should, what are you talking about? Jesus says should a lot, and because I'm a technical writer, I know the difference. Should and shall. There are two different ways of prescribing for something to be done. Should or shall. Shall means you will do it, and there's no variation allowed.
Like a Gestapo command. You
Yeah,
will do these
you
things.
will do these things this way. Yes, exactly. Shall, shall is very strict. And so if you're writing a technical manual and it says you shall open the valve at this, whatever, then you know that that's something you have to do. Shall mean or should means that there might be a little bit of variation.
Uh-huh.
Should means that there might be a circumstance in which that is not always the case. So should gives you a little bit of an out. So if you should open the valve to, 40 and you open the valve to 40 and it's too much, then you're going to turn it down. You're not going to open it up all that way. Should gives you the option to be a little bit invariant. So should is not a bad word,
Uh-huh.
but should is a really appropriate word for Jesus to be telling us, you should be doing these lessons every day. Not you shall be, if you don't, bad things will happen to you and you're going to end up in hell. But you should do it. This is a very strong suggestion to you that that you should do this in this way. And he gives us a little bit of an out for variation. So, I don't the talk about the word should, I think, has been taken completely out of context of reality and is being misused
Yeah. Yeah.
by people who are trying to tell you how to do things. You shall not say should. Uh,
And should not say shall?
excuse me, that made me laugh. All right, so okay, so it's just because you are not ready to do so that that what to do what you should, that time exists at all. And of course, that's the whole purpose. Should means that you have a little bit of time. You have a
Hmm.
little bit of a choice. You can
Yeah.
you can wobble a little bit. And that's the gift that God gave us. He's not demanding that we return to heaven and, bring everything back. He's saying, but you should, if you want to feel better,
Hmm.
you're going to do
Yeah.
that.
It's
Uh,
really almost a statement of cause and effect that, has become a way in our language to express that causal relationship.
yes, yes,
And if you
absolutely.
want A, then do B or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And depends on how much you want A as to how much you do B.
Yeah.
But if you absolutely can't live unless you do, or whatever, then you shall do it.
And maybe Frank Sinatra was channeling Jesus when he's saying doobie doobie doo.
Dooby dooby doo, that's right. Yeah, we were a stranger that time. Anyway, okay. So Helen then amended the opening lines per instructions from Jesus that were not written down. From time to time, Helen would dictate to Bill, quote, without notes, simply speaking the words she was hearing internally. The following line was the first example of this. And so this is direct from Helen to the ears of Bill to the typewriter. It is crucial to say first that this is a required course. Okay, so there's no shall about, no, there's no should about it. It is
Hmm.
a shall. We shall do this course. The next entries are from October 24th and contain Helen's dreams from the previous night. Interspersed in these was the following aside from Jesus regarding the course. Imagine that Jesus is coming up and doing asides in your dream. Yes, indeed. The way the course is given you is quite unusual. But as Bill said, you are not the average American woman, which is merely a fact. Your experience in your life has been atypical. Um, Helen now recalls in her notes an earlier dream, and then this one from the night of October 23rd. There's also one in which three animals, little ones, were in the same room, and I knew that I had to keep them apart because they hated each other. Being so busy, this was a great additional strain on me. One of them was pregnant, and the other two wanted to kill her, but the other two hated each other too. oddly enough, I was quite sorry for all of them because they were all three mixed up, but in different ways. I felt I had to get the pregnant one out first, though, because of the child. And then this is in parens. I thought this is an improvement over the recurrent dream I had for years about animals starving to death and me sometimes grieving, sometimes trying desperately to help them. At times also realizing I had starved them and feeling very guilty, but never saving them. Into parens. Wow, that's a blast of oh, by the way, and Helen had recurrent dreams about starving animals and and the fact that it was her fault that it was happening. Um, that's a very interesting uh, something I hadn't heard. Obviously I had because I read this before, but
Hmm.
hadn't really thought about that she didn't just have all the dreams about, Jesus and light and such, but she was having some really dark dreams that were filled with guilt and accusation and grief and fear and all sorts of stuff in the
Yeah.
starving animal scenario and trying to keep them all apart. I mean, I would think that Freud would have a blast with that. All that,
All the archetypes and all the symbols and
yeah,
yeah. Oh yeah.
it's all very symbolic.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm sure she probably got the symbolisms too, but
Sure.
maybe
Oh yeah. Well, she was a Freudian psychologist, so
yeah,
it would be surprising if she didn't. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so
Although, everyone personalizes their, we're all just on both levels from, as the course would say, about both our nighttime and our daytime dreaming. Um, we have our own interpretations, and that's kind of ties into the first law of chaos that, the truth is different for everyone. Well, we think our dreams are the truth, um, including everything we use to try to understand it. The entire realm of what we call science and religion is really, from the course's perspective, just two different approaches to dream interpretation. If you
yes,
think about it.
you're right about that. Interesting. Did you write that down? That's
No, but it just crossed my mind the other day that, I mean, I think I've I was thinking about, my heritage of my dad being had a degree in biology and supervised a cyclotron and was very, and appreciated science and the value that of its contributions to our society. And then my mom was very much a networker and really loved that there's something to metaphysics, and amassed this large library, of which the three blue books of the first course edition were in her library, and that's how I learned of the course. Um, Along with Marion Williamson and Jared Jampolsky and some of those early course teachers. But the science and religion were sort of represented by my mom's interest in metaphysics and my dad's in physics, if you will. So
wow, that's a perfect scenario for raising up a mystical boy.
well, I felt grateful to had those two influences and the desire to understand and in some way reconcile them. And modern physics really produced a lot of mystics in the last century. That Heisenberg and Bohr and Einstein and the whole
Absolutely.
bunch of them really came to the conclusion that there's just one thing, and um, if we think of it in Newtonian terms, we're going to miss a whole lot. So,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And it's so funny, of course, we talk about this, you and I and other course folks are talking about this all the time. And my son just the other day was, you know, telling me, Mom, I think, and he started going on this whole did you know modern physics says that this doesn't even really exist and this is a hologram? And I'm like, oh, really? Is that
Like
so?
feigning surprise.
Yes. And because,
You don't say.
because, I've been talking about this stuff for years and apparently he's thinking, he has a preconceived notion in his mind about what I'm thinking about because I say
Uh-huh.
God. And so it never occurs to him, that, I'm saying, but that's God. What you're talking about here is what I call God. This is my religion. This is how I see things as, you know, as a reality. And, science is just now catching up to something that, mystics have been telling us for, generations, thousands of years. And so I just thought that was very funny. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but but yeah, so I'm sure Helen knew about these dreams, and it just makes me think, do you have recurring dreams? Have you ever
Oh,
had?
sure, sure. Yeah. In fact, one of the ones that early on, when I first started studying the course back in the mid 80s, I think it was about that era, give or take a few years. I had prior to that, I had a recurring dream of being, chased by a dark hooded figure with a long saber and being terrorized and I was running, trying to get away. And then at one point, I realized that I had in a lucid moment, um, it's like, well, this is my dream. So I don't think I consciously said, this hooded masked assailant with the long saber isn't in my mind, but it was just but I did realize it was, well, this was my dream, so I don't have to be subject to this tyrannical terrorizer. And and so I in the dream I grabbed the sword out of his hand and snapped it in two over my knee and stomped on it and said, "Don't ever do that again." I never had the dream again. So
Oh my gosh,
yeah, yeah.
that's awesome! I
Well,
love
it worked for me.
Yeah, yeah, I
but
love
but I
it.
try to remember, it's like, well, that's no more significant than any other dream where I think I've solved some problem, but I think maybe that was just a, a representative of a moment where I realized that, this is a dream. It's got to be a dream, right?
Yeah, your mind just telling itself, I mean, really, the mind is a lot more aware of the reality, and everything's trying to tell us.
Hmm.
Everything is trying to tell us if we just listen to it.
Yep.
So I'll continue unless you want to read. You want to read?
Um, sure, I can read. And we're on Indeed, right?
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, Indeed, this does seem like an important dream. Well, I'm just going to back up a second and just say, that lucid dream that I just shared, I was thinking, um, I think it's in some ways easier to have a lucid dream where we seem to wrest control of of things from within those kinds of dreams, what we call nocturnal dreams, even though they're probably more uncommon than common. And yet, to generalize that, as the course suggests, all your time is spent in dreaming. If I can do that and just not try to manipulate the dream, but to recognize that it has no power to take my peace away, I think that is it's a very general statement that the course tries to lead us to that realization in so many different ways, and just say, how could anything that's a misinterpretation of reality affect reality? And because our reality is eternal, and dreams are by their very nature ephemeral and temporal and changing, the changeless can't be affected by the changing, right? So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, the whole thing, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. And
Hmm.
if you really understood what that was, you wouldn't need all the rest of this trying to, figure out or explain the workings of the world. So, I love that, that remembering that we're dreaming, which, Jesus asked us so often to do that. And you know, uh, seeing the sleeping dreams and being lucid in the sleeping dreams. Okay, that's one thing. Um, but you're right, being lucid in this dream. John Mundy is doing a whole series on that right now. on living a lucid life, I think it is. And
Cool.
just, just remembering the whole, being able to just look at this stuff. And,
Hmm. Hmm.
for me, more and more when I, especially say, I look at the world situation or politics or whatever and think about, how in the world did I manufacture this story? How could not that, I'm responsible for, the bad things that are happening. I'm responsible for the story of it that, somehow or the other, this is special or different, or, there's a real problem here, as opposed to, the problem that, may not be real, which there's a lot of those that we make up too. And but if we really look at it, uh, it really isn't real, as hard as it is to think that, because it seems so real. But it really is a dream. And when you ask yourself, why would I dream this? You begin to see the genesis of, where these thoughts of, I want to see guilt in my brother. I want to see my brother is unworthy. I want to remember my own guilt and my own unworthiness. Just taking actively looking at it and taking responsibility for the thought of what I think I see is happening in this world. That is the beginning of the lucid dream, being awake in the dream, if that makes any sense.
It just is noticing how much we want to stay in the dream. I think is part of looking at the resistance too. How much we want to have an alibi and a scapegoat uh, for each moment. It
Yeah, it's
keeps
not
us
my
out of our
fault.
mind, right? Yeah,
Yeah, it's not
it's
my fault.
exactly, which is what Ken Wapnick says, that if we could understand newborn's language, every baby would be saying, right? It's not my fault.
It's not my fault.
I didn't ask to be here.
Yeah.
Liars. We
Um,
we wanted to be here, so we'd have a scapegoat.
that's right. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. So,
But fortunately, it's a dream of being pathological liars.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay. So why don't I just start over now that I got a running start?
Okay.
Okay. So bottom page 220. Indeed, this does seem like an important dream, for it reflects Helen's inner commitment to letting Jesus's loving help extend through her. In this respect, the dream pictures the same inner decision reflected in the cave sequence, with Helen choosing not to use her mind's power for personal gain. Her promise to continue to water the plants growing in the desert reflects the same decision. On one level, the plant watering symbolizes Helen's nourishing, her decision to return to her function. Yet on another level, it can also be understood to symbolize the nourishing of the people who believe they inhabit the material world, which is the desert. A later symbolic experience of Helen's helping a wounded starfish, reported in part 2, also reflects this decision to help. And a little trivia aside, when I moved to the Oregon coast about 7 years ago, I learned that the proper name is a sea star, not a starfish. For those orange and purple things with 5 limbs that look like what's the correct geometric term? A pentagram.
Pentagram. Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So anyway, meanwhile, there was one more dream this same evening expressing the theme of Helen's helping concern for others. And Helen says, the last dream was about a child on the CDP program, um, and then brackets, a child's research unit Helen was consultant to, close the bracket. It seemed that I saw the child's protocols and suspected some sort of rather obscure diagnosis or problem. I was unwilling to go on record because it was a medical thing, and I thought Gates, and in brackets, the psychiatrist heading up the project, close the bracket, would disapprove. But I felt an obligation to the child and called her MD about it. I got a letter in return saying the physician was very grateful and that the child's life was saved and the information was badly needed. And then Jesus then continued, and then in brackets, when you say, and then, quote, if you want me to, I will, unquote. Please add, quote, and if you don't want me to, I won't. Close print, close quote. This is the right use of inhibition. There has to be some control over learning for the channelizing purposes. Remember retroactive inhibition, and in brackets, a learning theory term, close bracket, which should be easy enough for you. Sometimes the new learning is the more important and has to inhibit the old. It's a form of correction. So once again, the theme of correction surfaces because that's what the whole course is about, isn't it? It's correcting our misperceptions that we want to have to maintain a self that doesn't make us happy. Which, when you put it that way, sounds what? Right?
Yeah, but I like that they already have a term, retroactive inhibition,
Uh-huh.
a learning theory term,
Uh-huh.
which she knew and understood to relate to, this is all you're trying to do here
Uh-huh.
is, you think you've developed a habit that can't be broken,
Right.
uh, but it can with new information.
Right. It occurs to me there's a couple of different forms in terms of things that I quote unquote learned in the world. I remember when I went to college and took a uh, basically a modern physics class, um, and learned about the Lorentz transformation and things that happen as you get close to the speed of light. And the the equation basically just gets more complicated because it has to include a v squared over c squared term, and under the square root, if I recall, it's something like 1 minus v squared over c squared, where it's like time dilation and things like that happen. Where when you as you approach the speed of light, things get strange from our perspective. Um, Anyway, the reason for the technical aside is that the old theory is still true. You just have to add in another term to account for the the change in perspective. And in some cases, on this level, we can do that. But the course is wonderfully radical in the sense that it asks for a complete reevaluation, a total mind change, if you will, ultimately. But it's a gradual process. So we get to look at the insanity of the entirety of the ego thought system and contrast that with the sanity of the entire Holy Spirit thought system. And as we do that over and over again over years and typically decades and probably even lifetimes, it becomes obvious that just we really don't want the insanity anymore. But it's a total uh, reversal of thought, as the course says, or we must question every value that we hold, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
and it is, as you're talking, you reminded me of course, I always think about things that in the past have really been meaningful to me. And I was thinking about that the book of Stranger in a Strange Land,
Uh-huh.
and how Valentine Michael Smith could not understand why people laughed. And people would laugh, whatever, if, uh, what kinds of things people laughed at.
Hmm.
And until one day he was at the zoo and he saw, um, I don't know, maybe a monkey throwing, poop at something or something. And, and, um, and he started laughing, and they, it's like he had never laughed like that. And they're like, what, why are you laughing? What is, what is it that has, that has, set this loose? And he said, because it's it's too awful to cry about. It's too terrible to cry about. The only thing that you can do is laugh about it.
Mhm.
It's so awful. It's so crazy. It's so and then when I read that, I started looking at the world and thinking that's true. We laugh at when the guy slips on a banana peel and falls and busts his butt, even though that's a terrible thing. And you wouldn't want that to happen to you or anybody that you loved, but you're going to laugh about it because in any other, otherwise you would be crying about everything.
Mhm.
Where we look in the world and what we even call comedy, you go to a comedy show and what are they talking about? They're not talking about, oh, isn't this really funny that this is happening? They're talking about, look at how absurd the world is and how unfair things are and how, people are being, hurt by this, that, and the other. I mean, most modern comedy or comedy that we see, and in fact, ancient comedy, what am I talking about? It's all about, things that are just uh not funny and lighthearted.
Mhm.
That gets boring. We laugh at things that are awful because we again it's and why didn't we laugh at the tiny mad idea? That should have been the thing that we laughed at the most. The tragedy that could have never should never have been considered, could never have happened. Us being separate from God, are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. And you could laugh about it because it just seems so awful that there's no other reaction. But, we didn't laugh about it. We said, well, maybe that could happen. And look, that's why we're here now. And that's why the Jesus tells us so often in the course to bring these things to the Holy Spirit and stay with the Holy Spirit with it until we can laugh about it.
Mhm.
Because that's the only real thing that can happen. We see that, that it has to be a joke. It
Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
joke
Yeah.
to think that time can come to circumvent eternity. It's a joke.
It
What do
really
you do at
is.
a joke? You laugh.
Mhm.
So anyway, enough of my uh
No,
really
I think that's a serious topic.
serious. Yes, that's why.
Humor in the course. Well, in fact, as you recall, since I know you were there at that Weekend of Freedom retreat in Estes Park about I guess, better part of a decade ago now. I did a whole 75-minute segment on the humor in the course because I'd started writing all little smiley faces in the margins of places where I bracketed quotes from the course I thought was Jesus lampooning the ego, and I've given several talks on it that are on the ACIM blog.com. If you put in lampoon in the search, you'll find two or three of those. But I think there's a lot of humor in the course, and I think what helps it become more obvious sometimes is just noticing when you look at the uh, the course's metaphysics that shows us that there's it's just silly to take the dream personally, and that's what Jesus is doing in his course, and he's not in any kind of spirited or derisive way making fun of the ego. He's just saying how silly it is and that we would needlessly sacrifice our peace to something that can easily be changed to a joyous release, and sometimes the laughter can be a release. And there's a song, was it Timbuk 3, I think, that sings the laughter and tears. I need them every day. But initially we have to get in touch with our feelings, which oftentimes are depressing, sad, and so forth. But then we need Holy Spirit's help to say, okay, I've now seen how absurd this is and how hopeless it is. And then I'm thinking of Bill Thetford's quote as, in response to the ego. What it's like, well, Bill Thetford said, well, it's hopeless, just not serious. And I think that's where we take the tears and turn them to laughter. And I think it's somewhere in the manual. It says, the world was born out of fear and tears and will end in laughter. Because
Yeah.
that's really how we get out of it. I was just also thinking one of my favorite skits of all times is and it's not a mean spirited one. It's just really laughing at ourselves. Is that classic scene in Blazing Saddles where Slim Pickens on horseback with all of his band of bad hombres is riding into town to ransack the town, and harass the new sheriff, if I remember the plot correctly. Anyway, but there's that one scene where they're galloping across the desert, and all of a sudden they see this toll arm go down, and it's the Lepetamine throughway or something like that, and 10 cents, and Slim says to his buddies, "Damn, has anybody got a dime? Now we got to go back and get us a whole shitload of dimes." But with the humor in it is that we do that to ourselves all the time, and I think that's the kind humor in the course, is just to notice how ridiculous the limitations that we put on our own experience by identifying with the ego. If I think that I'm limited by a silly, seemingly separate self, special self, then I'm just needlessly stopping in front of that toll gate that the ego that I hired to make it has put up for me, and with my blinders on, ignoring the fact that I could go around this silly thing miles in either direction, and wouldn't have to worry about ego's imagined barricade to truth, right?
Exactly. And that is hilarious. That is one of the funniest things ever because, yeah, you just see the insanity of it. And, the only reason that they would stop there is because, there was a gate and it had a
Yeah.
name and it said 10 cents. And
But
forget
we don't
about
question
that.
ego's propaganda most of the time. We just figure, oh well, that's the reality that I've made for myself, and now I'm stuck with it. I've I've I've
Exactly.
got I've got an excuse for my grievances, and a scapegoat for everything. So why would I want to mess with that? Well, I don't know. Maybe at some point the misery will become obvious, and the fact that that's an option will then dawn across our mind. Gee, I don't need to do that to myself anymore.
Yeah, and what a relief it is when you realize that
Hmm.
and you can stop doing it. And then eventually, at some point you might start doing it again and have to stop yourself and will say, "Wait a minute, I'm done with that." How did this come back into my thinking? Because
Uh-huh.
maybe there's some little bit of it still hanging out there somewhere. But but really it's such a freedom then to stop behaving that way. Just stop with the crazy behavior of
Or
self
stop with the baby business, as Ken Wapnick said to his. Well,
exactly
actually, that he heard his grandson saying that. I think is how the story goes.
how
Yeah.
funny.
Hmm.
Yeah, but it's self-flagellation is what it is. And that's so many of us think that
Yeah.
that's necessary,
Yeah. And that really
human right.
it really just basically is another way of saying, the course asks us to really look at our whole notion of sacrifice and how absurd that is, and that the only thing we're asked to sacrifice is the idea of sacrifice, and the idea of sacrifice being our unquestioned, unexamined allegiance to the ego's whole thought system, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So why? We're just insane. Okay,
What were we thinking?
what were we thinking? Uh, so let's see. I think we have about 3 minutes left.
Yeah, maybe we should just draw a line there, right
Yeah,
after it's a form of correction. Yeah.
let's see. Yeah, okay. That's good. I'm drawing a line. See there? There's a line right there.
Very good. Very good.
You'll have to remember this for us. So, uh,
Okay. Okay.
but this is so helpful to me every week.
Oh, me too. Me too, Lynn. I really find rereading this book just tremendously helpful. And at first I was a little, oh yeah, it's because I was thinking what I thought 10 years ago. So that's a cool biography about Helen. And yeah, it's got some interest, but it's every page we read, it's like, wow, I am now seeing how much it's a chronicle of one person's resistance that really represents all of our resistance, and how we get out of it too, how
Yes,
we transcend that resistance by seeing the cognitive dissonance, if you will, the juxtaposition of the ego's insanity that's 100% with Holy Spirit sanity, which is 100%. Uh, and if we put those side by side, it's completely unfair to the ego, but only because the ego is completely unfair. And we see it for what
exactly.
it is, as being a silly, ridiculous choice. And again, I keep coming up with these favorite ideas and phrases that Ken Wapnick uses, but one of them is it the ego isn't evil, sinful, or wicked. It's just silly, and the world isn't the problem, and the thought system that made it, the ego, isn't the problem. It's really the choice in my mind, the uh, decision maker in my mind that's choosing the ego. That's the only problem that the course asks us to address, and that's why it's always addressed to that part of our mind.
That's it, exactly. And
Yeah.
I was looking at, I know that maybe you have this that Craig Villarubia
Uh-huh.
uh, at that conference in Estes Park, he did video all of that,
Uh-huh.
and I
Yeah.
believe I don't know if you have the video of your talk or
I
not.
do. In fact, that's on
Okay.
ACIMblog.com. Yeah, if you want to get that original one, and then I did a couple of sequels to that for School for A Course in Miracles. And but if you just put lampoon in the search uh,
On
box
ACIM
on in the
blog.
sidebar on ACIMblog.com, you'll find
Okay.
those. Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
I love that. I love
yeah.
that.
Because I think the course really reminds us of how ridiculous our ego is, and it really is hilarious when we look at it from the Holy Spirit's perspective in a non-derisive way. So anyway.
Yeah, and
Well, thank you as always, Lynn, for a wonderful hour of conversation, and look forward to the next one.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Bruce, and look forward to more of your beautiful photos of the Arizona
Oh,
wildlife.
sure.
And oh my goodness,
Yeah.
it seems so beautiful and fresh. And like I said, we got some rain. It looks like we might even get a little bit of snow today.
Okay.
So, but
All
it's
right.
only April, so yeah. Um,
Well, have a peaceful, forgiving week, everyone.
absolutely. Thank you so much.